I still remember the day the waters came. It was an ordinary morning when the skies suddenly darkened, and rain began to pour like a relentless curse. Our town, once a picture of suburban tranquility, was quickly transformed into a nightmare of rising water and despair. The flood arrived without warning, swallowing roads, homes, and the remnants of lives once taken for granted. Amid the chaos, survivors clung to whatever hope they could find, and I, too, found refuge in an emergency shelter hastily set up in an old community center. Inside the shelter, the air was thick with humidity, fear, and the saltiness of tears. The building, with its cracked walls and flickering fluorescent lights, became a temporary haven for those of us who had lost everything. We huddled together on mismatched cots, our faces drawn and eyes haunted by what we'd witnessed. Yet, amid this desolation, a curious rumor began to circulate, a whisper that something beyond our collective grief had come to guide us. Late one night, as the rain continued its mournful song against the roof, I heard murmurs about a ghost. They said a gentle, luminous figure had been seen drifting through the corridors, a spirit offering silent guidance to lost souls. Some claimed that it had led them to extra blankets, to bottles of water hidden behind locked doors, or even to safe passages out of the shelter's most dangerous areas. The stories were sparse at first, shared in timid voices over the low hum of the generators, but the promise of a benevolent presence sparked a fragile glimmer of hope. I couldn't help but wonder if, in our darkest hour, this mysterious entity was merely a trick of our collective trauma, a projection of our desperate need for comfort. Or perhaps, it was something real, an echo from beyond, reaching out to mend our shattered hearts. Despite my skepticism, I resolved to keep my eyes open, my recorder at the ready, and my heart willing to accept even the most extraordinary explanations for what we were experiencing. That night, as I lay on a worn cot, I watched through the narrow window at the turbulent water outside, wondering if the ghost might also be watching over us. The idea was as comforting as it was strange, a spectral guardian amidst the ruins of our lives. Little did I know that this mysterious presence would soon blur the line between solace and something far more unsettling. In the days that followed, life in the shelter slowly took on a surreal quality. The initial shock of the flood had given way to a resigned, almost numb routine until the ghost began to appear with unsettling regularity. It was not a dramatic apparition, rather, it was subtle, manifesting in moments when despair threatened to overwhelm us. I first saw it in the dim light of early morning, a soft glow moving along the far end of the main corridor. It had no discernible features, only a gentle radiance and an aura that seemed to reach out, as if beckoning us forward. Curiosity pushed me to document every occurrence. I placed my camera in strategic corners of the shelter and roamed its darkened halls after curfew. In one instance, I followed the ethereal glow as it drifted from one room to another, pausing at a supply closet before fading away. Several survivors, too, reported experiencing its presence, a child's whispered thank you in the middle of the night, an elderly man who claimed the ghost led him to a forgotten stash of food, even a mother who swore it had guided her to her missing child during a brief moment of panic. As the hours turned into days, the benevolence of the ghost provided a tentative comfort. In a place where every day was a battle against hunger, cold, and the constant dread of another disaster, the mysterious light seemed to offer a beacon of hope. Its appearances were brief yet significant, a reassuring glance in a mirror-like puddle, a soft murmur echoing in an otherwise silent room. And while many began to regard it as a guardian angel of sorts, I couldn't shake the nagging thought that nothing in this world is ever as it seems. I listened to the whispered theories circulating among us. Some believed that the ghost was the spirit of someone who had perished in previous floods, returning to guide us as a form of penance or unfulfilled duty. Others, however, suggested a darker origin, a remnant of a troubled soul that had not found peace, whose benevolence was nothing more than a mask for its true intentions. The more I investigated, the more ambiguous the phenomenon became. Every comforting sight of the ghost was interspersed with subtle oddities that defied explanation. I began to keep a detailed log, noting each encounter, the time of day, the location, and the circumstances. The pattern was curious. The ghost always appeared when someone was on the brink of despair, but occasionally, its presence coincided with strange events, a door that would inexplicably slam shut, or whispers that seemed to come from empty corridors. Despite the growing mystery, I couldn't deny the initial warmth it brought to our frayed spirits. In a world uprooted by calamity, even a ghost could offer a semblance of salvation, if only for a while. As the days stretched on, the comforting presence of the ghost began to take on a more ambiguous hue. At first, every sighting had been a source of solace. But gradually, unexplained occurrences started to ripple through the shelter, casting long shadows over our fragile hope. It began with small, unsettling details, a scrap of cloth fluttering on its own, the faint sound of footsteps when no one was there, and disembodied voices echoing softly in the dead of night. I found myself questioning everything. Was the ghost truly a benevolent guide, or was it something else entirely, an entity with its own agenda? My log entries, once filled with gentle observations, now became tinged with doubt. The ghost's radiance, once a sign of comfort, seemed to waver at times, its light flickering as if uncertain. I recalled one incident vividly. In the middle of the night, while I was reviewing my notes, the corridor outside my room fell eerily silent, and then a low hum resonated from the shadows. It was as if the shelter itself was murmuring secrets, and I began to wonder if the ghost was orchestrating these phenomena to mask a deeper, more unsettling truth. Conversations with other survivors only deepened my uncertainty. A young man, eyes wide with fear, confided that he had seen the ghost transform, its form shifting from a gentle guide to something darker and more foreboding, just for a fleeting moment. An elderly woman whispered about dreams in which the ghost pleaded for revenge, its voice a mix of sorrow and malice. Even as some clung to the hope that the ghost was a guardian, others began to suspect that it was a harbinger of further misfortune, its benevolence a ruse to keep us docile in the face of our despair. Driven by an insatiable need to uncover the truth, I began to delve into the shelter's history and the flood's legacy. I scoured old records and interviewed longtime residents about the building that now housed us. I learned that decades ago, the same shelter had once been a community center, and not long before, a mysterious incident had occurred there. There were rumors of unexplained disappearances, of a kind soul who had once attempted to save lives during a similar flood, only to vanish without a trace. Some even said that her spirit lingered, caught between worlds, offering guidance to those in need, but perhaps, also, exacting a hidden, unspoken judgment. The more I dug, the more I realized that our current sanctuary was steeped in a legacy of grief and unresolved trauma. The ghost, it seemed, was not a simple apparition of kindness. It was a complex echo of the past, a remnant of a tragedy that had never been fully understood. And now, in the wake of our own disaster, it had returned in a form that was as ambiguous as the memories that haunted these walls. My heart, already heavy with loss, felt the weight of an impending revelation that would force us to confront truths we'd long buried. As the final night in the shelter approached, the heavy floodwaters had begun to recede, revealing a pale moon shining through breaks in the dark clouds. In this tentative calm, survivors gathered for one last communal meal, their faces etched with exhaustion and a fragile hope for a fresh start. Yet, amid the cautious optimism, an undercurrent of unease pulsed through the shelter's corridors. I sensed that this night would bring an ultimate confrontation with the ghost that had both comforted and haunted us since the disaster. Determined to uncover the full truth, I quietly left the dining hall and retraced the ghost's elusive trail. Following the faint glow that had guided me earlier, I arrived at a forgotten wing of the old community center. This neglected corridor, lined with dusty relics and faded photographs of happier times, exuded an air of melancholy and secrets. In a small storage room filled with mementos and abandoned belongings, I discovered evidence that would forever alter our understanding of the spectral presence. Among scattered items, I found a battered leather-bound journal belonging to a young nurse who had once worked in the shelter during a previous crisis. Her delicate handwriting chronicled her experiences during the flood, her relief at the ghost's timely appearances, and her growing doubts as inexplicable events unfolded. The final entry was particularly haunting. It described a night when the ghost's intervention inadvertently led to further tragedy, a mistake that had cost innocent lives. Her sorrowful words suggested that the benevolent guise of the ghost was merely a fragile mask concealing a far more complex nature. At that moment, the ghost materialized before me. Its form, once warm and luminous, now appeared imbued with profound sadness and ambiguity. In a voice resonating with echoes of the past, it whispered fragments of its truth. It confessed that it was not merely a guardian spirit but the remnant of a soul who had sacrificed everything in a desperate bid to save others during a long-forgotten flood. In its anguish, the spirit had become tethered to the shelter, compelled to guide survivors even as it wrestled with its own haunting mistakes. The ghost's dual nature, a beacon of hope and a bearer of regret, mirrored our struggle to rebuild amid loss and trauma. It had intervened out of love, yet its actions had wrought unintended harm. I realized then that its guidance was as much a curse as it was a blessing, a reminder that even the most benevolent forces can harbor sorrow. I vowed to share this truth with the survivors. In the dim light of that final night, I promised to honor both the help and the heartbreak the ghost had brought, ensuring that our community's recovery would be built on an honest understanding of our past. As I stepped back into the common room, the lingering glow of the ghost slowly faded, leaving behind a silence heavy with revelation and hope for a future free from hidden burdens.